Well, our passage of scripture from 1 Corinthians today talked a lot about judging. Being judged by others, judging ourselves, which Paul says he didn't, and being judged by God. And judging is a topic that's gotten lots of press in recent years. We're hypersensitive about judging in our culture. I think Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, "Judge not, lest ye be judged," is set to surpass John 3:16 as the most famous verse from the Bible. That gets quoted a lot these days, though often those who quote that verse probably can't tell you anything that comes before it or after. So what about judging others? Let's start there. We're not going to deal with Matthew 7 today, but Paul mentions judgment from others in our passage from 1 Corinthians, and he said, it doesn't matter to me if I'm judged by you. He didn't care what anybody else thought about what he was doing or saying. He was on a mission to share the gospel, and he was going to do it, regardless of what anyone thought. And obviously, as we know from the life of Paul, there were a lot of people who thought that he should stop what he was doing. There were a lot of people who were not happy about his preaching or his teaching or his missionary journeys. But even though they could and did form opinions about his actions and his words, they couldn't really judge what was going on in his heart. They couldn't look under the surface and see Paul's motives. They knew what Paul was doing and saying, but they couldn't know the truth about the inner man. Well, this video we just watched was a great example of that. Of course, it was a made-up scenario, but it really points out the fact that when it comes to judging another person, we have no idea what the truth really is. We can listen to what people say, but that might not represent reality. We can watch what they do, but that doesn't really tell us about their motives. If the man in the video was attending church, nobody looking on would know if he was doing that out of a sense of obligation or adoration for Christ or personal guilt. And he might not even know himself. The Bible says our own hearts are deceitful and wicked, and that most of the time we don't even know our own motives. So even when we judge ourselves, what we do and what we say are only a very small part of the truth. And especially when we judge others, what we see and what we hear are only a very small part of the truth. In the Bible, God does ask us to judge between right and wrong, to learn the difference between good and evil, and then to shun the evil and embrace the good. That's a central theme of the Bible. But knowing what to do and what not to do isn't the same thing as reading the heart. Judging between good and evil actions doesn't mean you are equipped to judge who is righteous and who is wicked, because that has to do with the heart. In Noah's day, you couldn't really tell who was righteous or wicked by looking at who got on the boat. Noah and his sons were saved from the flood because they got on the boat, not because everything they did was virtuous or upright, as we found out after they got off the boat. In Jesus' day, you couldn't really tell who was righteous or wicked by looking at who spent time in the temple. Those who claimed to be the closest to God were the ones who nailed him to the cross. And in Paul's day, you couldn't really tell who was righteous or wicked by looking at who was selling their land and giving all the money to the church. Remember the story of Ananias and Sapphira? That's the danger of judging by externals. They aren't always a reliable indicator of what's in the heart. In fact, in his second letter to the Corinthians, which we'll be reading next month, Paul takes all this talk of judgment one step further as he warns the people against judging based on appearances. For there are false apostles and deceitful workers masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It's not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Satan masquerades as an angel of light? That isn't how we usually think of Satan, is it? Popular culture depicts him as a man in a red suit with a pointy tail and a pitchfork. The book of Revelation calls him a dragon and a snake. And the Apostle Peter described him in one of his letters as an enemy who prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Who would ever dream that a beautiful angel bathed in the glow of a warm, comforting light could be a demon looking to destroy them? No doubt Satan will take on whatever appearance he believes will best suit his evil purposes at the time, but it is a bit alarming to consider that he has the power to take on a righteous appearance. That's why God is very careful to put us on our guards. Don't just assume that something which appears loving is actually loving. For Satan can and does masquerade as the most loving being in the universe. Things are not always what they seem. People could be just the opposite of what they claim to be. You might see an angel of light and not realize it's the devil. You might see a bruised and battered man hanging on a cross and not realize it's the King of all creation. That's why only God can judge. Only He knows the truth. And He is in the business of revealing the truth. That's where His judgment comes in. Because you might have thought it was strange that we titled this service, God is not a judge. When we're dealing with a passage of Scripture where Paul writes, the Lord is my judge. So perhaps we should have made the title a bit longer. It should really have been, God is not a judge, at least not in the way we think of judges. But that wouldn't fit on the sign outside. God is not a judge, at least not in the way we think of judges. Because the issue is about what God's judging entails. And I think a lot of us have some pretty erroneous ideas about that. When God is pictured in the Bible as a judge, most of us think of Him sitting in His big judge's chair, maybe with his robe on, much like a judge presides over a courtroom in America. And in our legal system, the accused is brought before the judge, and after listening to testimony, the judge makes a determination as to guilt or innocence. The judge pronounces the verdict. He's the one making the decision. And if he decides the accused is guilty, he imposes the sentence. But I don't think that's what it means for God to be the judge. We're not guilty because He says we're guilty. And we're not innocent because He says we're innocent. We're either guilty or innocent because that's what we are. And since God deals in reality, He is in the business of revealing what is so. That means His judgment simply involves the unveiling of truth. Let me use an analogy. I grind my teeth in my sleep. And apparently I did this for many years before I became aware of it. In fact, I only became aware of it when it got so bad that my grinding caused a hairline fracture in one of my teeth. And I went to the dentist in pain, which is always the best time to go. Have you heard that joke? What time do you go to the dentist? tooth hurty. My girls love that joke. But during that appointment, many years ago now, the dentist suggested that I wear a bite guard at night. And here it is. It's kind of gross. You can see where I have a filling with mercury. It's a piece of, I don't know, very thick plastic or some similar sort of material that's been precisely molded to fit my upper teeth. And I snap it in place at night, like that. And it provides a barrier between my top and bottom teeth so I can't injure them when I clench my jaw. Now, when I went to the dentist with that tooth pain, I had no idea I was grinding my teeth in my sleep, and neither did anybody else. And although I trusted the dentist's diagnosis of my condition, there really was no proof that he was correct. That is, until I started wearing the bite guard. And I'll tell you what, it has judged me. This little judgmental piece of plastic. If you turn it over, you will find deep, frighteningly deep grooves in the bottom where my teeth have been grinding against the underside. And just like that, I have been judged guilty of being a teeth grinder. But this piece of plastic didn't do anything to me. It didn't have to pronounce a verdict or impose a sentence. It simply unveiled what had been unseen up to that point. It revealed the reality of what happens in my mouth at night. And that's how God judges us, by revealing, not declaring. He doesn't pronounce a verdict as judge. In fact, in John 12:47, Jesus said this, "If anyone hears my words and does not keep them, I do not judge that person. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world." That's pretty plain speech. I didn't come to judge you. I came to save you. But that doesn't mean there's not a judgment. In the very next verse, Jesus goes on to say, there is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. The very words I have spoken will condemn them at the last day. You see, God makes no pronouncements about his children. He doesn't have to. He simply reveals truth. And the way we respond to that truth will reveal what's true about us. God brings light into darkness. He shatters lies with the truth. And once we've been confronted with that truth, we have to choose how we'll respond to it. We can't simply ignore it or pretend we didn't see what we've seen. We have to choose how we will respond. And it is our response to the truth that will reveal what is hidden in our hearts. So we may be able to fool others with appearances, but how we respond to God will expose what is tucked away on the inside. Satan may be able to masquerade as an angel of light, but he can no longer change how he responds to God in his heart. And that's what will condemn him on the last day. But it doesn't work that way in our justice system, does it? There's no inherent barometer of guilt or innocence that tells judges or juries what is actually true. We have to rely on witness testimony and forensic evidence and inferences. Hopefully, we get it right most of the time. But things are not always as they may appear on the surface. And there have been many defendants who have been pronounced guilty when in fact they were totally innocent. In such unfortunate cases, unless the accused is granted a new trial, the actual reality of the situation doesn't matter. They may be innocent, but in the eyes of the law, they're condemned. But the beautiful thing about God's way of judging is that each person is completely in charge of their own eternal destiny. God isn't deciding what we are, whether innocent or guilty. He's simply revealing what we have chosen to be. This means that although he is righteous and holy, and we could certainly trust his judgment, we don't have to. Nobody will have to trust that God was fair or correct in his judgments. Nobody will have to wonder if he rendered the right verdict or imposed the proper sentence. All they'll have to do is watch and see what happens. Just like a few weeks ago when we talked about the difference between butter and clay. Let's pretend the butter and the clay looked exactly the same on the outside, and you couldn't tell which was which. If you could set them both outside in the sun, you'd know pretty soon which was the butter and which was the clay. And that's all that's going to happen on the day of judgment. The reality of our hearts will be exposed. And even though appearances might be deceiving right now, there will be no problem telling the butter from the clay on that day. Butter reacts very differently to the sun than clay does. And when God appears, those who are wicked in their hearts are going to react very differently to him than those who are righteous in their hearts. So, in his judging, God doesn't really act like any judge we've ever known. At the end, he doesn't pronounce our guilt or innocence. He doesn't determine that we are wicked or righteous. He simply respects the reality of what we've become. Therefore, Paul says, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. May God be praised, then, as the judge who does not judge. For the only gavel he holds in his hand is the one that respects our freedom to become whatever we choose. Amen.